had a preacher friend a few years ago, and he likes asking his congregation things. I like doing that too sometimes. But he asked the congregation, what's something that tends to be way more complicated than it should be? And so I was amused by the answers. And he's a preacher out in Colorado, and even though it's Colorado, that's a long ways away, they have some of the same things. See if you agree with these. One of them was, and I'm gonna put pictures up here, but putting furniture together. Anybody? I don't read directions so well, so sometimes trying to put things together like that. Another one that was high on the list are roundabouts. Roundabouts they kind of scare me a little bit when I approach them. Another one was child car seats. So I love this picture because they got this police officer to put the child car seat in. I used to have a lot of difficulty with my oldest child. I struggle with that thing. Another one, and boy, can we identify with this one? How about taxes? Understanding, not just paying them, but understanding why you have to pay so much. But here's my personal favorite, and I absolutely agree with. And that is folding fitted sheets. That's what mine looks like. I don't know how to fold fitted sheets. When I get Dawn to help me, I still can't figure out fitted sheets. The reality, and I do this a little funny, but in today's world, in some ways, it's become really complicated for people to find Jesus. And there are a lot of reasons for that, I think. I remember some years ago watching a video, and whenever I see these videos, I always perk up and pay attention. And it was like a man on the street video that just asked the average person, who do they think Jesus is, or what do they think about Jesus, to get their answers. And so now some believe the way you and I would, that he's the Son of God, that he's the Savior of the world. But a lot of people who gave answers were things like, they were more indifferent. They didn't have an opinion at all. They weren't sure if they believed or not, but they didn't care. They didn't even care to talk about Jesus in any way. Some were uncommitted. I would call them uncommitted. They weren't sure if they believed in him or not. They weren't quite sure. And then those who did, some did, if they believed he was real, they didn't believe that he was the Son of God. And I was really disheartened, but it kind of made sense. So many people, if they even believe in Jesus, do not believe in the Jesus that we read about in our Bibles. So, if someone wanted to find Jesus, how would they? There are a lot of choices here. So I was thinking, well, a lot of people, and certainly Christians do this, we give them a Bible. We give them a Bible, and that's not a bad thing, but I read my Bible my whole life, and there are things about God's Word that are real complicated. Unless someone guides us, unless someone who is stronger in the Lord, and I've been blessed in my life to have a lot of really good Christians, including my parents and grandparents, who guided me in God's Word. People could ask someone, but that can be complicated too, because what if the person is shy? What if the person, and this is where I was in a good chunk of my life, I didn't know that I had the answers, so I was afraid to say anything because I didn't think I could speak right or say the right things. People could go to church, but that's complicated too. I understand everything we do, but if you've never gone to church and you just show up one day, that can be a little bit different. You can go online. That's kind of the new thing. I can go today, and I can do it right now on my phone, Google Jesus. But that's way more complicated nowadays, because people have a lot of different beliefs about Jesus. So I've learned over the years the best, simplest, most straightforward way with the fewest complications to find out who Jesus really is through you and me, right? It's through you and me. It's us. It's us taking Jesus. But the reality is that means that you and I must be uncomplicated and accessible. Because therefore we will make Jesus way less complicated and more accessible. And that's what I want to talk about today in this series that I've called So Loved. That because God so loved us, I believe that should make us want to do something with that love. Uncomplicated. You know I like talking about words, so I'm going to talk about a couple of words. Uncomplicated. What is uncomplicated? Right? Think about that. It's pretty straightforward. What you see is what you get. I love those people. That no matter where I see them in life, whether they are at Walmart or down the street or it doesn't matter where you find them, that what you see is what you get. I'm going to use something that I used a few sermons ago. These uncomplicated people are easy to read signs. You can see who they belong to shine in their life. Accessible. Means easy to speak with or deal with. An accessible person is a person who is an open book and they are approachable. I've been around some people that I was afraid to go up to because they look very unapproachable. Or because when we look a little grumpy all the time, I don't know that people want to come up to us. But when we have a smile on our face, when we have the peace of the Lord in us, when we have the joy of the Lord, when we are living that thankful life, I think we are very approachable. See, Jesus was that way. Jesus sets the bar high. Jesus did that to a wide spectrum of people. If you're not doing this now, you need to be doing this. I can't encourage you enough. You need to be walking with Jesus in the Gospels every day. The more we walk with Jesus, the more Jesus rubs off on us, and the more we understand about who he is, and what he came to do. And we get to see the real Jesus. And when we understand and see and experience the real Jesus, it makes sharing Jesus with people way easier. But Jesus did this to different people. I love studying the life of Jesus. Jesus had conversations with the really religious and the worst sinners possible, like tax collectors. Jesus talked to the rich and the poor. He talked to male and female and so on and so forth. Jesus broke an awful lot of barriers. That's because Jesus was very uncomplicated and extremely accessible, even when he was 12 years old. I'm going to go to a story that I don't know that we go to that often, but if you want to join me, it's in Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2. In fact, with the exception of here in Luke and in Matthew, the Gospels don't give us a whole lot about Jesus outside his adult ministry. So this is a very unique thing. I want to pay attention to it. But I'm going to read along, and you can follow along with me. Luke chapter 2, starting at verse 41. It says, Now his parents, it's Mary and Joseph, went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it. Now that's going to be a little strange to us. But they came in a really big caravan, a lot of relatives, a lot of people. And apparently Jesus had a little bit of ADHD like I would. I was in and out of all kinds of people, and that's apparently what Jesus did. But supposed him, picking up verse 44, but supposed him to be in the caravan and went a day's journey, a whole day. And they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. Then after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. But when they saw him, when his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother, I love the fact that his mom was the one who speaks up here. His mother said to him, because I can picture my mother doing the same, Son, Why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you. And he said something that I hope we remember. He says, why is it that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house? Or in some translations, be about my Father's business. But they did not, and this is important, they didn't understand this yet. They did not understand the statement which he made to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And I want you to really pay attention to this last part, because we're going to stay right here for a moment. And Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and favor with both God and man. Sometimes I like to start at the end and focus on the end to make what's before it a little bit clearer. As I said a moment ago, except for this little portion and a little bit in Matthew, we get nothing outside the time Jesus was about 30 to 33 years old. And so that makes this important. This little verse 52, is a wonderful summation of the next 18 years of his life. Jesus grew. Jesus grew. Jesus grew. Now, go back a little earlier. Luke chapter 2, verse 40, it says that when Mary and Joseph came back out of Egypt, remember when Jesus was a baby, they were coming for his life, so his parents, because of a dream, fled to Egypt and stayed there for a while. And when they went back to Jerusalem, it says this, Luke 2:40, the child, talking about Jesus, continued to grow and become strong, increasing in wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. So in both passages, it uses this word increasing. That's a fascinating word for me. Increasing means that Jesus, even Jesus, the sinless Son of God, made progress. There was a progression there. And I love that even the perfect sinless Son of God had a process of growth. I figure if Jesus grew, not just physically, but spiritually, if Jesus grew, and it was important for him to grow this way, then it needs to be for us also. It says here, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature. Wisdom and stature. Wisdom. So we're not just talking about physical growth. We're talking about understanding. Jesus made it a point to develop in every area of his life. This was this fascinates me, because if anybody didn't need the spiritual stuff, it would be Jesus, because he was the Son of God, and yet he still valued growing in his wisdom. Jesus also grew in favor. Now this is the second part of that. In favor with both God and men. God and others. Favor. Did you know that favor and often in the Bible is translated as grace? Grace. A favorable attitude of gratitude. A favorable attitude of gratitude. That's grace. God is not only grateful for Jesus, but so were those that surrounded Jesus. That's because I believe Jesus was uncomplicated. Jesus is knowable. Jesus is approachable. Then and now. And I figured, what an incredible goal for me. What an incredible goal for us. To live both in favor of God and increase in wisdom, but also in favor of people. And it needs to be in that order. When you seek one to the exclusion of the other, it throws it all out of whack. We'll modify our accessibility and we'll make our lives, and I'm telling you, this is an answer to a lot of my questions today, why for so many has life become so complicated. And here's one of the reasons. We are making it way more complicated than it should be. Because we're seeking, something is not in the right order. For instance, it sounds good that to seek God's favor and nothing else, that sounds great, but in the process you tend to hurt people. Let me give you an example. The religious leaders. The religious leaders at the time of Jesus, that was their number one goal, was to seek God's favor in every aspect of their life. And yet, they threw up obstacle after obstacle for people to find Jesus. When we seek people's favor above God's, well, that's massively destructive. The religious leaders, let me use them as an example again. They love to dress up and speak in such a way as to draw attention to themselves so that they would get approval to people. And in the process, they became blind to the Son of God before them. We must seek both. And we must seek in the right order. God's favor, but also man's. That's how we're going to, by the way, make the difference in this community. Because people will see how much we value God and God's will for our life. We will be bright reflections of Jesus Christ, but we will also prioritize them above ourselves. Today's passage, one of the reasons I picked it and chose it, was we get two really good keys that we learn from Jesus about being more accessible and less complicated in life. And I believe if we can do this, and I'll say this many, many times over the next bunch of years, that the vast majority of what we get to be or do as a church are outside these walls. This is the launching pad. This is where we get to plug into the power source and be encouraged and be challenged, but then leave this place and go be the church. And we need a little help sometimes. So the first thing we do, and I'm going to put this up here. If you're taking notes, this is your first blank. We need to show up. We need to show up. Jesus showed up at the right place at the right time, and specifically for him in the Temple of Jerusalem. As we read from that scripture, it's the Feast of the Passover. What I love is we learn a little bit about Jesus' parents and about their priorities. They made it a priority, and this was not an easy travel. They traveled from Nazareth to Jerusalem every single year at this time. And they came in this big, probably a lot of relatives, a lot of friends from Nazareth, going from Nazareth to Jerusalem. And it's like 70-something miles, which doesn't sound far unless you try to walk it with a whole big caravan of people. Not easy. Took commitment, took time, took energy, took some planning. But they made this a priority every year to go to this sacred event. Jesus and his family prioritized worship and prepared themselves and then went through and did what they needed to do. They showed up at the temple all that week, even though it's probably difficult, probably cost a little more than they had, but they did it so that they could please God. And in doing so, and I love that when we do things like this, we put ourselves in a position for God to impact us where he is at work, but in the process, we impact those around us. We need to show up wherever God is at work. I'm going to say this a couple of times. We need to show up where God is at work. Not always where we want God to work or where we want to be, but where God is at work in the lives of people. That's where we need to be. I want to thank you. I want to make a real point of this. I want to thank you for being here today. You could have made a lot of other choices. Most of Valrico, most of Brandon made a completely different choice today. You chose to be here, and I never want to take that for granted. And I thank you that you are participating in the ministry of New Life Christian Church today. But here's the thing. We need to show up where people are. Where they're discouraged, where they're hurting, where they're depressed, where they're sick, where they're broken, where they're struggling, where they are in desperate need of the truth, the grace and the love and the life of Jesus Christ. When we show up, that we can answer the questions that they're asking. People, I think, today are asking more questions than ever before. And they're going to ask even more in light of the events of yesterday, regardless of where you fall on it. It breeds chaos. It makes us argue or look at things even more, and though we struggle. People have more questions than ever before. And the church seems to have fewer answers, or they're answering in riddles, complicated riddles with really religious language that nobody understands besides them, or they dumb it all down so simplistic that they miss the meat. We don't need to give complicated answers to the Bible's great mysteries. People, honestly, they just want to know who Jesus is and what he did for them. They want to stop hurting. Boy, is this true? The thing that distressed me yesterday is finding out that once again, a young person did what they did. And it just reminds me of how many young people have no clue how to deal with things in this life. And they've got a lot of questions, and we need to be listening. And we're not going to be really good at that if all we're good at is arguing. People need a purpose to live for. That young man yesterday needed a purpose to live for and died instead. They want something real, authentic to believe in, to connect their life to. But reality is showing up is hard. Showing up in people's lives is hard, especially when it's people around us that are really hard to love. I want to tell you a story about this basketball goal. Derek was a brand new preacher in this town, and he, of course, brought his family with him. And one of the very first things they did was tick off their neighbor. You know what ticked their neighbor off? In fact, it ticked their neighbor off to the point that their neighbor immediately went to the city council to complain about them. They put up a basketball goal right in their neighborhood because they realized that one of the things that they could do, because they had kids, was have pickup basketball games and use that to really love on the kids, find out about their families, and start to do some things in their life. Well, this brought some noise and some energy into that neighborhood, and it ticked off the neighbor. So they go and they complain. Well, it got bad really fast, and so Derek gathered his family together and decided that instead of fighting this person, which they could have, they would find ways to love them instead. So the first thing they did was they took them a batch of cookies. By the way, nothing can diffuse things maybe faster than a really good batch of cookies. I'm just saying. If I'm struggling, if I come up here struggling, a good batch of cookies will do some good. I'm kidding. They took him cookies. And then they went out of their way to show him kindness as much as they could, every chance they got. And after a little bit of time, he softened. This is the best part of the story. The next Christmas, this neighbor brought them cookies. I love that. See, we not only need to show up as hard as it is sometimes, but we need to stay around. We need to stay around. We need to stick around. That's the second thing. Mary and Joseph, when they came to Jerusalem and they had an exhaustive, week-long, 7-day celebration and all the things that entailed, they were ready to go back because essentially to do that, you have to interrupt your normal life. Yes. Joseph the carpenter has got all these projects stacking up back at home. They need to get home and check up on, they had animals. Who knows? But they needed to get back to the normal way of life. And so they did. But if Jesus had gone with them when they were ready to go, he would have missed an important opportunity. Now, this is for all the youth in here, I'm not promoting disobeying your parents. That's not what this is about. Jesus was unique. Yes. Uniquely so. Because he had to be about his Father's business. He needed to be present in the temple. The reality is, as a normal American male, I like quick results fast. I want fast resolutions. I want instant answers. But here's the problem with that. If I'm not careful, I'm going to be so fast at doing that I'm going to rush past God's will. I'm going to rush past the people that God puts in my life. Because I'm going to have my head down and I'm going to be going the way that I think I need to go, even when I think it's the right thing, and I might miss what's right there. Now, let me give you another reason why we should stay. I love words, and I highly recommend you study your Bibles, because sometimes the language is way richer than we even realize. This word increased, to go back to 52, that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor of both God and men. That word increased also means, you ready? To lengthen out by hammering. By the way, that means that's kind of an unpleasant thing. Some of the best lessons I've tried to learn in life, I was too thick-headed to get, because at the time I was going through them, I was in pain. I was hurting. And I didn't realize until I got a little bit older that God can even take the worst that we go through and make us stronger because of them, but even more importantly, I think, make us stronger enough to the point that we can help others when things are being hammered out in their life. See, when we don't stay where God is at work, we're going to miss the very opportunity that God is giving us to not only personally grow, but to have the greatest impact on another person than we can. There are people in my life who have gone through terrible things, and in the midst of those terrible things, still experience the joy of the Lord. And you talking about an encouragement to me? Some of the most encouraging letters I ever got from someone who had these terrible seizures too often. And they would go, every time they had a seizure, they would go into a coma for 2 or 3 days, and then they would have to live at this rehabilitation clinic for a month. Every single time, and this happened multiple times every year. And this lady had a lot to be unthankful and inaccessible about, but she wrote me some of the most wonderful notes at the right time that I needed, even as her life was being hammered out. You see, if we don't show up and stay around, our life is going to be way more complicated than it needs to be. We're going to give God less and less access to our lives. And that's where the problem is. We need to let God hammer out what needs hammering out in our life. Or as I like to say, let the Creator create His masterpiece in you. That's you. This brings me then to, you're like, why do I still have this table? I haven't talked about the table today. Well, everything about this sermon, especially verse 42, kept bringing me back to what I call the empty chair. You see, this, for everybody that didn't hear the whole thing, everybody is invited to sit at the table with Jesus. Jesus, we'll say, is represented by this chair. And he sits at the table and he wants to have fellowship with us. And we get to have fellowship with him. But in the process, we give up our lives to him and let him transform us. But somebody's got to invite you, because you will never know about the table, but then you have to have the guts to sit down at the table. So I was thinking a lot about the empty chair this week. A lot. And I want you to think about the empty chair. How favorable would it be to God if we invited people to sit in the chair? And I always think about two different groups of people. One person to invite is the person who doesn't even know who Jesus is, who has no idea who Jesus is. But in a lot of our lives, this needs to be filled maybe by a different kind of person who at one time or another knew who Jesus was, but for whatever reason, something happened and they have moved away from Jesus, and they need to be invited again to sit down and once again have fellowship with Jesus. So I want you to be thinking, and I want you to think hard this week. Who needs to sit? Who in your life do you know who needs to sit in the chair? And I'm going to give you an exercise. I want you to do something. If you'll notice at the end of the bulletin, I don't know if you noticed this, but underneath the very final thing where it says the empty chair, there's a blank. I'm just going to put this out there and you do whatever you want with it, but I want you to at least put one name there. Or get another piece of paper. You might have several names. I want you to put their name somewhere and put it where you can see it. And maybe just you. And every time you see it, I want you to think about what are some ways that you can show up in their life this week, or stay around in their life. I want you to, what could you do to encourage them? What could you do to build them up in the Lord? And then when you start to see a little door open, I want you to invite them. Simple things. Maybe you've invited them to church 1,000,000 times and they're still not coming. So change your tactics. Invite them to a Wednesday night Bible study. Invite them to a Friday small group. But maybe that's even too much. So invite them over to your house for dinner. Maybe that's a little too much. So invite them. Say, hey, let's meet up over here at Dunkin' Donuts and I'll buy you a cup of coffee. And you just talk and listen to them. Maybe you can even take them a plate of cookies. Maybe today, for whatever reason, maybe, just maybe, you're not sitting here today. You know you need to and you want to, but something has gotten in the way. Something has taken you out of the seat and moved you away, and you don't know how to. And I love the fact that every week, at the very end of what we do, before we go home, we offer an invitation. We offer this wonderful hymn of decision. There's a couple different ways that we could talk about it, but it's to give you an opportunity to respond, to do something. Because I know, and you probably know this too, the moment we head out, everything that I said today, everything that we've experienced will start to leak. They'll go away. And whatever God is putting on your heart this morning, I don't want you to leave without responding. Today, if you need to re-sit in this chair, maybe there's somebody in your life and you don't know what to do, and you desperately want them to sit here. I want to encourage you. Scotty and the praise team are going to come forward. They're going to lead us in this song. It just gives us an opportunity. Today, if you need prayer, today, if you're hurting, today, if you have a praise or a thanksgiving, and God has been awesome in your life this week, I want to encourage you, come forward and share. Share and give us some encouragement, because we need it too. Whatever the decision is today, I'm going to go ahead and ask Scotty to go ahead and start leading us.